Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any update from Rouse IAS Study Circle. Join the only official Telegram channel of Rouse IAS Study Circle to get the relevant materials and important updates. Welcome to the Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of the newspaper analysis from the Civil Services Examinations perspective. So in today's session, we are going to discuss The Hindu Delhi edition dated 13th February 2022 and few important topics from the Indian Express Explained section of the last week. The topic to be discussed have been displayed on your screen and the timestamping of the same has been provided in the description box below.
Pre-Parikshan 2 is live. It went live at 9 a.m. today morning, that is 11th of February, and will remain live till 9 p.m. on 13th of February. And it is a very right time for you to understand where you are actually leading in terms of preparation for 2022 prelims. What you will get from this particular test, let Naviz throw some light on that.
Yes, sir. So this test is very important because this is a real UPSC simulation for you, and this will provide you an opportunity to attempt for this test. Now, through this test, we will give you an all India ranking at the national level. This will help you in identifying your strong and weak areas. Further, we will also provide you a comprehensive analysis of your performance as compared to the top performers, that is the top 5 performers.
Now, apart from that, you will also get a live analysis as well. And live analysis will actually help you understand the knowledge gaps that are there in your preparation, which you can actually fill so that when you take the examination on 5th of June, you ace the competition. This is an initiative from Rouse IAS where we want to help you in order to improve your performance and ensure that your name is there in the list of people who are going to appear for the mains examination. The link to register for this test is there in the description. All those people who are already registered on eLearn platform, they do not have to do anything else. They have to just go to eLearn and it will be there on the feed wall. Take care, all the best, and do attend the test.
Hello everyone, there is an important announcement for all of you. Pre-Parikshan 2022 has been extended for one more day for those students who have not yet attempted this test. All those are requested to attempt this test latest by 14th February 2022 by 2 p.m. The result announcement as well as the test discussion will take place on 14th February 2022 sharp at 3:30 p.m. Now moving towards the first topic. This topic is from the economics sections and the topic reads I on the deficit. This topic falls under the General Studies Paper 3 syllabus in the Economic Development and the micro section of the Government Budgeting. The context of this topic is that recent skepticism associated with the global rating agencies which have not given the adequate ratings to the Indian government. In the Union Budget of 22 to 23, the government has ramped up its capital spending plans to a record 2.9% of the GDP to revive the economy. But this excessive spending has not provided the adequate room to the Government of India to control the fiscal deficit below the targeted levels. And in this backdrop, the rating agencies are concerned about India's heightened general governmental debt levels. Now, this topic is very important from the static as well as the current point of view. For example, in UPSC 2016, a very conceptual question was asked from the static. There has been a persistent deficit budget year after year. Which action or actions of the following can be taken by the government to reduce the deficit? Now, in order to answer this question, you need to be aware about the concept of deficit and what are the various deficits which are associated with the India's budget. For example, when you read economy articles in newspapers, you come across the terms like fiscal deficit, budgetary deficit, primary deficit, revenue deficit. So we are going to discuss all these terminologies under this session in order to make your concepts crystal clear. There were 4 steps which were given as an option to you which can be taken by the Government of India, and you had to select the correct options out of these 4 things. Now the correct answer for this question is C, 1 and 3 because you can eliminate the 2 options easily because introducing the new welfare schemes will in turn demand immediate expenditure and not generate the revenue. However, you will understand this question in a better way once we are done with this session targeting all the terminologies which we have just discussed. Now this flowchart gives the broader components of the annual financial statement. And if you have read the basic polity, the annual financial statement comes under Article 112. Now carefully analyze this flowchart. The government budget has two broader components. One is the revenue budget and the other is the capital budget. And as we all know that budget is the sum total of all the receipts and expenditures, these components are also further divided in this line. The revenue budget has further two sub-components. One is the revenue receipts and other is the revenue expenditure. Similarly, capital budget also has the capital receipts and capital expenditure. Now the revenue receipts is further divided into tax revenue and the non-tax revenue, because the revenue sources of the government in this component lies in two things. Either the government can collect the money from the taxes which are levied on us. Those taxes can be direct tax, for example the income tax, or the indirect taxes, for example GST. Or the government can also have a source of its revenue from the non-tax revenue. For example, the fees which you pay to the government for various services. For example, the challan. So all these things are the non-tax revenue, and this does not form the part of the Consolidated Fund of India. The tax revenue forms the part of the CFI. Similarly, the examples of the revenue expenditure is like the salaries which are provided by the government, the interest payment on the loan which has taken by the government of India from some other institution. So the interest on that loan which is to be paid will be considered as revenue expenditure. And the capital which has to be returned will be part of the capital expenditure. Now this distinction is very important. Be clear about it. Similarly, the capital receipts is also further divided into debt receipts, for example, the loans, and the non-debt receipts, for example, the PSU's disinvestment. So now I hope that this basic flowchart is clear to all of you. We'll again revise this flowchart in order to understand all the definitions which are associated with this. So again I am repeating this. The government budget is divided into two components. One is the revenue part, other is the capital part. Both the revenue as well as capital parts are further subdivided into receipts and expenditure. That is revenue receipts RR, revenue expenditure RE. Similarly, capital receipts CR and capital expenditure CE. Further, the revenue receipts are divided into tax and non-tax revenue, and the tax revenue is divided into direct and indirect taxes. Now we'll look some of the basic definitions which are continuation in this flowchart. Now what is budgetary deficit? Budgetary deficit is the total expenditure minus total receipts. Now this total expenditure or the total receipts encompasses the revenue as well as the capital account. That means the total expenditure will be capital expenditure plus revenue expenditure, and the total receipts will be capital receipts plus revenue receipts. The difference between these two things will be the budgetary deficit. Now come to the fiscal deficit. Now fiscal deficit is total expenditure, that is the capital expenditure plus revenue expenditure, minus total receipts excluding the borrowings. Now what does this mean? We have discussed that in capital receipts part there are two types of receipts. One is the debt and other is the non-debt. And under the debt we have loans. So what was happening is that in order to make the budgetary deficit zero, which means that in order to prove that all the expenditure which has been done by the government, it matches the revenue which was earned by the government, only then we can have a budgetary deficit as zero. So there can be a simple way out. No matter how much expenditure you are generating and no matter how much revenue from this part you are generating, even if you are falling short of money, you just borrow that money from some institution that will be part of the loans, in turn will be the part of the debt receipts or the capital receipts. So for example, if I am the government and I am spending 100 rupees, but I am earning from this component only 50 rupees. So how will I prove my worth? The only way is that I will borrow rupees 50 from some institution in order to convince you that see I have adequate revenue to finance my expenditure. But this will not give you the real picture. So what happened is that the fiscal deficit excludes these borrowings in order to have a better view that how much expenditure is being done by the government and how much actual revenue is generated by the government by its own steps, not the borrowings. That is why the fiscal deficit is the total expenditure minus total receipts excluding the borrowings. Then comes the third thing, that is the primary deficit. Primary deficit is the fiscal deficit minus interest payments. Now in primary deficits, interest payments have also been ignored. And we have already discussed that interest payments make the part of the revenue expenditure. Now come the revenue deficit. Now this is very simple because the terminology used over here is the revenue. So only the revenue component will be used, and that means the revenue deficit is the total revenue expenditure minus total revenue receipts. Only this component. Ignore this component. You have to ignore the capital component, take only the revenue part. Now the last term is the effective revenue deficit. The effective revenue deficit is equals to revenue deficit minus grants in aid for the creation of the capital assets. Now let us understand what is this. If you have understood that why the loans have been taken in the capital receipts part, because the loan is taken by the government, that means that it has gained some money, that is why it will be the receipt. But now assume that if the union government has given loan to the state governments, so the money which is given by the union to the states will come under the part of the expenditure for that particular year. And because it is a loan, it will be the part of the capital. So that means it will be the capital expenditure, right? Similarly, there can be another mode of providing money to the state governments. For example, grants. The difference between the loans and the grant is that if the state government has taken the loan, they have to repay the principal amount on that loan as well as the interest on it. But if the union government is providing grants to the states are not under bondation to repay that thing. Clear? So what will happen is that this grant will be the part of the revenue expenditure because grant is not loan and hence it is not under the capital part. The grants will be the part of the revenue expenditure. But what happened is that several experts said that whatever grants the union is providing to the states, it might happen that the states might use those grants for creation of the capital assets. For example, the union government has provided a grant of 100 crore to some state, and that state is using that grant for building the road infrastructure. That means the capital asset. So the experts say that the effective revenue deficit should also be compiled, which will be the total revenue deficit minus the grant in aid which have created the capital assets. So these are the 5 important terms which are associated with the government deficits: budgetary deficit, fiscal deficit, primary deficit, revenue deficit, and effective revenue deficit. Now the news which we are discussing is in relation to the ratings given by the global rating agencies to the government of India. Now what happened was that because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw that the social spending of the government rose to a huge level. For example, the government was involved in spending in providing the food to various migrant workers, in creating quarantine centers, providing the medicines, etc. Because of this high expenditure, the fiscal deficit rose to around 9.2% of the GDP. Now here we are talking about the fiscal deficit. But the earlier government expectation was to reduce the fiscal deficit to 6.8% by 2021 to 2022. But the reality is, at the end of the financial year of 2022, the fiscal deficit stood at 6.9%. That means it is 0.1% more than the expectation of the government. Now if we come to the recommendation of the 15th Finance Commission, the 15th Finance Commission recommended that the fiscal deficit must be reduced to 5.5% by 2022 to 23 financial year and consequently 4.5% by 2025 to 26 financial year. Now the global rating agencies are skeptic towards these targets. They have raised certain issues because of which they have not provided the good ratings to the government of India. The issues raised by these global rating agencies, for example Moody or Fitch, etc., have said that the reason is that Indian government do not have the defined targets. We still have the undefined targets, especially the medium term targets. The second issue is that they have said that the recent budget of 22 to 23 falls short on the long term structural reforms. The third issue is that this budget does not provide the new sources of revenue generation for the government. And the fourth issue is that the fiscal deficit target is higher than the anticipated. As we have discussed that the target was 6.8%, but it still remains at 6.9%. So they say that target is higher than the anticipated one. But in counter to this, now we should also acknowledge that what is the stand of the Indian government. Indian government says that this particular issue that we have undefined targets is not true. Our targets are well defined because even if you are going by these things, you can see that we have a time bound targets. For example, the 15th Finance Commission has recommended to reduce the fiscal deficit to 4.5% by 2025 to 26. The second point which Indian government has said that the debt to GDP ratio of India is far lower than many developed economies, for example, US, Japan, and several countries of the European Union. This shows that India has strong macroeconomic indicators. And the third thing is that government has said that these rating agencies are always skeptic towards the newer taxes. And we have discussed in the previous DNS also, and you must have heard about this in various other news as well as read about these in several articles, that recently the government has come up with a new tax on the crypto assets. So even this step is associated with some sort of skepticism as far as the global rating agencies are concerned. So that was the summary of the entire news article which has appeared in today's The Hindu newspaper at page number 12. Now from the economy we are jumping toward the science and tech section. This topic has appeared in today's The Hindu New Delhi edition at page number 11, and this topic has some concept from the physics. Now we'll not go deeper into the details into all the dimensions of this concept, but only to understand this particular word which has been mentioned in this news article, you must know that what is meant by the Poisson ratio. Now here you will see the beauty of the physics. In simple terms, the Poisson ratio is the ratio between the deformation along the force and the deformation in direction lateral to the force. Now what happens is, let us assume that this block is a clay block. Now if you are applying the pressure on this clay block in this direction, that means that if you are compressing this clay block, you can well assume that this clay block will expand in this direction, which means that if you are applying the perpendicular force, the deformation of the material will be in lateral direction. The ratio between this force and this deformation is known as Poisson ratio. That is why the definition says the ratio between the deformation along the force and the deformation in the direction lateral to the force is called the Poisson ratio. Again I am repeating, if you have applied the perpendicular force on this particular block, there will be a certain deformation in this area. Let us say it is delta y. And similarly, there will be some deformation in the lateral direction, that is the delta x. The ratio between these two things will be the Poisson ratio. Now this Poisson ratio can be positive or negative. For example, in this clay block, because there is an expansion associated in this direction, we say that Poisson ratio will be positive. But now the question is that this is very commonsensical, that if we are applying the force in this particular direction, the material will expand in this direction. Can there be some materials which do not expand in this direction? Or can there be some material that if you apply the force in this direction, the material further compresses in this direction also? If the compression is taking place in the opposite direction, we call that Poisson ratio is negative. And if there is no expansion or contraction, we say that the Poisson ratio is constant. So the materials which have negative Poisson ratio, those materials are called as auxetics. Now this terminology is also very important because it can be asked in the prelims paper as such. The context of this topic is that some students from the IIT have made certain materials which can be very useful and which have a negative Poisson ratio. However, that is not much relevant from the examination's point of view. The relevancy is limited to the understanding of the basic concept of the Poisson ratio and the materials which are known as auxetics. Now we will move towards our third topic, that is in relation to the Sundarbans. Now Sundarbans is always one of the important areas as far as the UPSC environment section is concerned. Moreover, this topic is also important from the map point of view. And the sheer ecological importance of Sundarbans presses the UPSC aspirants to learn about it more and more. So, in today's session, we will discuss some of the key facts related to Sundarbans and the challenges which this particular ecosystem is facing. Now, Sundarbans are the mangrove forests which are spread in the country of India as well as in the country of Bangladesh. The major portion lies in the Bangladesh and the minor portion is in India. Now, this Sundarban is located at the Ganga, Brahmaputra, and Meghna delta, and it is located in south of Tropic of Cancer. Moreover, you are aware that Sundarbans is the largest delta and the mangrove forest. Now, these two things are important. It is the largest delta as well as the largest mangrove forest in the world. The Indian Sundarbans is bound on the west by the river Muri Ganga and on the east by the rivers Harinbhaga and Raimangal. Now memorize the names of these three rivers. This might be helpful in your prelims examination. There are other important rivers also which flow through this ecosystem like Saptamukhi, Thakuran, Matla and Guasaba. Now there is one very important key fact related to Sundarbans. The Sundarbans National Park was established in 1984 and it has a core region with the Tiger Reserve. We all know that it has a huge population of Bengal tigers. Now, the interesting fact is that the Sundarbans is the only mangrove ecosystem in the world which sustains the population of tigers. Further, this Sundarbans was designated as the UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987. The Sundarbans are also designated as a biosphere reserve under the UNESCO's MAB program. Further, in 2019, the Sundarbans wetland have been recognized as the wetland of international importance under the Ramsar Convention. It means Sundarban is a national park. It has a core region of tiger reserve. It is present in UNESCO's MAB list of biosphere reserve. It is a World Heritage Site and it is also a Ramsar site. Further, the Sundarbans is home to many rare and globally threatened wildlife species such as estuarine crocodiles, Royal Bengal tigers, water monitor lizard, Gangetic dolphin, and olive ridley turtles. Again, this thing is very important. We have already discussed that the Sundarban deltas is the only mangrove forest in the world inhabited by tigers. But in recent years, Sundarban is on the verge of climatic crisis because there are several factors which are responsible for this. For example, the rise of sea level, increase in intensity of cyclones. You must have heard about these several cyclones like Amphan, increasing soil erosion, various pest diseases associated with it, large scale torrential rainfall. So all these factors somehow you can understand are related to the rise in the anthropogenic activities in terms of vehicular emissions, industrial emissions, concretization, encroachment of the floodplains or wetlands, etc. So all these factors are changing the climate, which is a reality, and this Sundarbans, one of the brightest, most important and most diverse ecosystems of the world, is on the verge of climatic crisis. Now, this topic is from the Indian Express Explained section, and this topic points out towards a very important aspect. Recently, you might have witnessed that there are several claims which are made by the government of India in order to control the climate change. But this article points out that despite the government's climate focus, the grants to the key adaptation funds in India are reducing. The article also provides certain concrete data to prove this stand. That is why under this session we will discuss that what is that key adaptation fund, what are the stats which prove that the grants in these adaptation funds are reducing. Further, we will also understand the other associated smaller topics in the context of this broader topic. So this topic falls under the General Studies paper 3 in the section of Environment and Disaster Management and the micro section of the Conservation, Environmental Pollution and Degradation and Environment Impact Assessment. The context of this topic, as we have discussed, says that the grants released under the NAFCC, Now, NAFCC stands for National Adaptation Fund for Climate Change. So again, the context says that the grants released under NAFCC has fallen from rupees 115 crore in 2017-18 to around rupees just 27.76 crore till December 2021. Now, this table will help you to understand that how the demands, the grants under the NAFCC is falling year by year. As you can see in 2017 to 18, as we have already told, that the grant was around 115 crore rupees. In the next year, it went down to 109 crore. Next subsequent year to 33 crore. Then in 2020-21, there was a partial increase, but in 2021 to 22 till December 2021, it has again reduced to its lowest. Now this trend is also very important because in prelims exam there are several questions which are from the economic section and based on the trend of the last 5 years or 10 years or so. So that is why the reduction is not absolute. There was a slight increase in the year 2020 to 2021, but however the general trend is it is reducing year by year. So this news article points about three key important terms which are relevant from the UPSC's perspective. The first is the green bonds. The second is the National Adaptation Fund for Climate Change. And the third is the National Action Plan on Climate Change. We will discuss all these three subtopics in order to holistically understand these things. So as all of you know that recently the Union Budget 2022 to 23 has been released. And in the context of the topic which we are discussing today, this Union Budget came up with two important highlights. On the one hand, it said that to fight the climate change, it will come up with the sovereign green bonds. And on the other side, it also said that several thematic funds will also be established. But as we all know that under the Paris deal, India has pledged these three things under its national determined contributions. Just a quick revision of these three commitments. First, India has said that it will reduce the emission intensity in the context of GDP, that is the emission intensity to GDP ratio, to 33 to 35%. Second, it has committed that it will increase the share of the non-fossil based fuels up to 40%. And third, it has said that it will increase the carbon sink to the tune of 2.5 to 3 billion tons. But several experts say that in order to fulfill these commitments, more than $2.5 trillion will be required. So again, the point is that from where these funds will come. In the context of this news, we have discussed that the finance under the National Adaptation Fund on Climate Change is reducing. On the one hand, the finance which is provided is reducing. On the other hand, India is making so high commitments. So what is the guarantee that the commitments which are made by the Indian government will be fulfilled when we know that the finance under these specific funds are reducing? However, from the examination point of view, now we will discuss an important topic, that is the National Adaptation Fund on Climate Change. Under this topic, we'll discuss two important things. One is the details of NAFCC and second is the objective. So the NAFCC was started as a central sector scheme. Now this word is very important. It was started as central sector scheme. Central sector scheme means that all the finance will be provided by the union government, and state government will not be sharing the financial responsibility. Further, it will also be implemented by the union government. So one, it was started as a central sector scheme in the year 2015 in order to strengthen the capability of the states and the union territories which were particularly vulnerable to the climate change. The second important fact is that the NABARD, that is the National Agriculture Bank for Rural Development, has been assigned as the national implementing entity. So the NIE for the NAFCC is NABARD. This is a very important fact for you people, especially in the prelims. The objectives with which the NAFCC was started was, the first objective was to provide adequate funding to the missions which were under NAPCC, that is National Action Plan on Climate Change. Now what is NAPCC we will discuss in the next slide, but for now its objective, the objective of the NAFCC was to fund the various missions under NAPCC. The second objective was to assess the vulnerability and the climate impact assessment of various policies The third important thing was to focus on the capacity building of various stakeholders which are involved in this ecosystem to fight the overall climate change. And the fourth objective was to establish and develop the knowledge network. Because until and unless we do not have adequate knowledge network, we will not be able to build our capacity. That capacity might be in terms of manpower, that capacity might be in terms of finance, that capacity might be in terms of technology. But the knowledge network plays an important base for the capacity building in any program, and so is the case with the NAFCC too. Now we will move towards NAPCC, that is the National Action Plan on Climate Change. Now, as we have discussed that the objective of the NAFCC was to fund various missions under NAPCC, that means there are more than one missions under NAPCC. So the NAPCC consists of total 8 national missions. The first is the National Solar Mission. Second, National Mission on Enhanced Energy Efficiency. Third is the National Mission on Sustainable Habitat. Fourth, National Water Mission. Fifth, National Mission on Himalayan Ecosystem. Sixth, National Mission on Green India. Seventh, National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture. And eighth, National Mission on Strategic Knowledge of Climate Change. Now, all these 8 missions are very important, and you should remember that what are the exact 8 missions under NAPCC. Because again, in prelim examinations, the question can be asked that which of the following missions are there under National Action Plan on Climate Change. So these are the 8 missions under NAPCC which were started. But as we all know that there is always a second side of the coin, there are certain issues also regarding NAPCC. The first issue is that there is a lack of coordination. All these missions are supervised by different ministries, and that is why there is a lack of coordination. There is absence of any statutory body to overall guide and coordinate all these missions to work in tandem. But the problem is that there is no statutory body and each ministry is working in isolation, generating the problem of lack of coordination. The second issue is the lack of accountability. The council is not accountable. The council is not accountable towards the policies which it is formulating. The questions are not asked and they are not answerable to the general public. Many of the data are not there in the public domain. And the third issue is the lethargic approach. It has been witnessed that there are just 1 to 2 meetings since 2015 till now. But in order to make any policy to function effectively, we all know that what is the important role of communication, and that communication can happen only through the regular meetings. But we can imagine that if there are no regular meetings, the approach is so lethargic, what can be the outcome? So that is why in order to address these issues, there are 4 major recommendations which Indian government should take in this context. The first is that on the lines of United Kingdom, India should establish a statutory body and its mandate must include to report all the things to the parliament. That means that statutory body must be held accountable to the parliament. The second is experts say that India must come up with the practice of carbon budgeting because the carbon budget will allow India to assess that what are the multifold impacts of various other policies on the carbon emissions. What is the relation of GDP and the green GDP? So in order to balance the carbon emission and the carbon reabsorption, there should be a carbon budget. Further, the third recommendation which has been made by the experts is that India should build an ecosystem for the carbon trading. Now, you all know that carbon trading is a very much fundamental policy initiative since Kyoto Protocol and more importantly in the Paris deal. So, India should establish its own domestic mechanism for the carbon trading. And the last recommendation is that while formulating policies, because we know that India is so vast in terms of its geography, culture, etc., regional needs must be addressed. There cannot be one size fits all approach. For example, the climate associated challenges which the Thar region of Rajasthan faces will be entirely different from the climate challenges, let's say in Arunachal Pradesh or let's say in Meghalaya. In one region, the issue is of rising heat waves. In the other region, the issue is of rising erraticity of the monsoons. So that is why the regional needs must also be taken while formulating the broader policies. Now coming to the third small brief topic, that is what are green bonds. Now what do you understand by bonds? Bonds are the fixed income instruments. By the basic knowledge of economy we know that the earnings of the share depends upon the profit or the loss which that company faces in which you are a shareholder. But in the bond market there is a fixed income guarantees because here we have the rate of interest. So similar is the case with the green bonds also. These green bonds are the fixed income instrument which can be issued by anyone, that is the government, corporates or the multilateral institutions. For example, World Bank is said to have issued most number of green bonds. And further, as the name is suggesting, that all the finance which will be raised through the issuing of these bonds will be exclusively used for the green projects only. For example, setting up of solar park, or for example, investing in technology which is based on renewable energy. Okay, so green bonds are the fixed income instruments which can be issued by the government, corporates, or multilateral institutions. But the important thing is that all the finance, all the money which will be raised through these bonds will be used exclusively for the green projects only. That is why green bonds nowadays have become a very important instrument in a fight against climate change, an important component of the climate financing. Now, this topic is from the Prelims Environment section's point of view, and this topic talks about an important species which has recently been listed as endangered by the Australian government. The name of this species is koalas. So, under this session, we will study some important features of this particular species which can be relevant from your UPSC Prelims examinations point of view. So the context of this topic is, as we have already discussed, that in Australia these species were earlier considered as vulnerable. But recently the government have officially classified these species as endangered. Now this is a picture of koalas. This picture will help you to give a visual memory so that you can remember this species for a longer period of time. These koalas are marsupial creatures. Now you should know that what exactly are the marsupials. Marsupials are the mammals, and these mammals have two unique features. The one feature is that they are prematured, and the other feature is that they have paunches. For example, you must have heard about the kangaroo, that the mother kangaroo keeps its children in her paunches. Now, if you look at this particular picture, this is the paunch whereby the kid is sitting. Okay, so marsupials are the mammals which are premature in nature, who are born incompletely developed and are typically carried and suckled in a paunch on the mother's belly. These marsupials are chiefly found in the grasslands of Australia, New Guinea, and America. As far as the spatial distribution of koalas is concerned, this shows its spatial distribution. The koalas live in the eastern areas of the continent of Australia. Here we have savanna grasslands which provide as a natural habitat for the koalas. But the most important thing is that these koalas thrive upon eucalyptus trees. But despite the fact that Australian government has considered them as an endangered species, according to the IUCN status, these species are still vulnerable in nature. So that is why you need to be very aware about the language the question is asking. Now, most of the time, the UPSC obviously will ask the question related to the IUCN status. However, you are required to memorize both the things. As per the IUCN, it is vulnerable in nature, but the recent context was that Australian government in their domestic territory have classified these species as endangered. Now, as we have discussed that they survive on a strict diet of up to a kilogram of eucalyptus leaves every year, and due to the low nutritional value of the eucalyptus leaves, these koalas tend to sleep for extended periods. Now, it is also a unique feature. In a single day, koalas sleep around 18 hours a day to conserve their energy and to overcome the lack of nutritious food which they feed upon. But now the question arises that why the Australian government have increased the severity of the threatened nature of the koalas, why it has classified or shifted the threatened category from vulnerable to endangered. That is because in recent years the koala species have been threatened to a huge extent, and primarily there are three reasons responsible for this. The first reason is that in 2019 you must have heard about the bushfire in Australia which took place. That bushfire is commonly known as Black Summer. So, because of that catastrophic fire, it was estimated that around 60,000 koalas were impacted and their natural habitat was destroyed. It was estimated that around 12 million acres of land was destroyed across the New South Wales alone. The second factor responsible behind their destruction is the spread of a disease. That disease is known as chlamydia, and this is a sexually transmitted disease which is known to cause blindness and cysts in koalas' reproductive tracts. And because their reproductive tracts are impacted, there are huge problems in generating the new breeds. And the third and the obvious reason, which is one of the biggest factor behind the destruction of the natural habitat, is the rampant urbanization. And the destruction of the koala species is no more an exception. Rampant urbanization have further destroyed the natural habitats, in turn has led to a huge scale deforestation. So that is why in recent years, because of three factors, that is the Australian bushfires, the sexually transmitted disease known as chlamydia, and the rampant urbanization, ignoring the natural habitats and the planetary boundaries of that particular ecosystem, have pushed the Australian government to increase the degree of the threatened nature of the koalas from vulnerable to endangered. But again, I am repeating, as far as the IUCN status is concerned, this species is particularly vulnerable in nature. So now is the time for the question of the day. The question asked in yesterday's DNS dated 12th February 22 was in relation to the Milan exercise. There were three statements given and you had to find the correct statement. The statement 1 said, it is an annual naval exercise conducted by the Indian Navy. This statement is incorrect because this exercise is not an annual exercise but a biannual exercise. So by this option, if you eliminate the statement 1, you get only the C option as the remaining one. So that is why the C is the correct answer. The question from today's DNS is in relation to the koala species found in Australia. There are two statements given and you have to find the incorrect one. The statement 1 says IUCN categorizes it as an endangered species, and the statement 2 says they belong to a marsupial family.